it's hard to navigate because we don't know. We've been in this for probably almost 2 months, and we don't know how long this is going to be. I mean, we know it's going to be hard, but we don't know the repercussions, the exact repercussions, besides the economy is going to be horrendous. And I think the unknown is causing this. You've already been shut in, and then you don't know what's going to be in the future. Your finances are kind of up in the air. So there's just a lot of fear. And so I understand that brings out the worst in us sometimes, especially whatever given day, something happens, something that triggers. I mean, we're human.
You're listening to The Creative Imposter, episode 101. Welcome to The Creative Imposter. I'm Andrea Klender, and I'm so excited about today's episode. I can hardly stand it. Jen Hemphill is a financial counselor who really helped me get myself on track when it came to how I was spending the money flowing out of my business day to day. It has taken me nearly 40 years to actually have a personal budget. And while I'm not perfect at sticking to it, I'm pretty proud of myself, especially since I had to dig myself out of complete financial devastation and bankruptcy after closing my first business venture just 7 years ago. But we're not here to talk about me. We're here to talk about you and your money, and more specifically, how you feel about your money and how that guides the choices that you make and the actions you take. This is part of our ongoing conversation about how we are all creatively pivoting, shifting, adjusting to stand on what doesn't always feel like stable ground these days. And the good news is, even if you're listening to this way in the future, once the COVID pandemic has passed, Jen's messaging is consistent, and her advice is solid, no matter where and when you find yourself. I originally met Jen through podcasting. You'll hear about that. And her podcast is Her Dinero Matters. If you want more money mindset support, I highly recommend subscribing in your podcast app, and links to connect with Jen, of course, and find the resources she mentions will be in the show notes for this episode at thecreativeimposter.com/101. And now, here's financial counselor, podcaster, and wonderful human, Jen Hemphill. So what people will have already heard in the moment that they're listening to this is I will probably talk about how you and I have been pod pals or pod friends for quite a while, connected through the She Podcast community.
I do remember meeting in Chicago.
Yes, at Podcast Movement in Chicago at a She Podcasts meetup.
Yep.
And how I have worked with you on some personal financial coaching and sort of figuring out how to navigate and get my ducks in a row around my personal spending. Spent so much time like figuring out business finances, but then as a solo entrepreneur, like figuring out the personal side of things, of what you're spending money on and how to even know where it all is going.
And I'm glad that you did this, because a lot of entrepreneurs, solo entrepreneurs, they think, well, I'm in business, I'll make money and I won't have to worry about it. But you do need to have, a structure with your personal finances and designate where it's going to go. And obviously you need it to pay bills and so forth. So I was just so thrilled to have you in there in that program and taking action and being proactive with it.
So your official title is accredited financial counselor. Is that right?
Yeah. So that's the fancy letters that I carry. And essentially it's not a financial planner. A lot of people think just because financial planner is a term that is known and people attribute anybody that helps with finances to be a financial planner. And a financial planner is going to give you advice on those long-term investments. I'm not going to give you advice on long-term investments. As a financial counselor, I'm helping you on the day-to-day, on the practical, simple solutions of how to manage your money day to day.
And one of the things that you do in addition to your coaching is you have a show called Her Dinero. I can't even speak Spanish. Her Dinero Matters.
Yes, yes. So it shifted. It wasn't always Her Dinero Matters. It was Her Money Matters for a long time until actually about almost 12 months ago. And the reason being is for a long time, I had a tug in my sleeve, like as a Latina, why I'm not speaking to Latinas. And granted, the how to, the day to day money management, it's the same for anybody. It doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman, what color you are, it's the same. But really, what the difference is your culture, is your history, is how you were brought up. That's where the differences are. So I felt it was important to address that, because if I share with you a story about money that has no relevance to you, you're not going to pay attention. So it's important for me to bring out those stories from, it's primarily Latina women, where other Latina women can relate. So I had that shift because I noticed that there were a ton of people talking about women and money, or talking to women around money, but I didn't see that focus on Latinas. And I felt that it was important.
And also something kind of important that you just mentioned that I have learned recently, I feel like just in the last few years that I've realized, is that money and finances are very personal and very emotional. And there's so much about your history, your childhood, your culture, your family, all of that stuff that comes into play around money. And I always kind of thought money was objective. Like it was this thing and it was a skill that you either had or you hadn't. And it should just be like you do this or you do that, and either you win or you, or you lose. And it never occurred to me how personal it actually can be.
It is. I know I didn't realize that until I was 10 years into my marriage. And I was wondering, okay, I know this money thing. I've read personal finance books. I applied everything that they tell me to do. So why aren't we further along? Why are we still stuck? Why do we
Mm.
still have debt? Why are we still depleting our emergency funds? And that's when I realized, well, not immediately,
Yeah.
but once I set the intention, or I set out that question, is when I started realizing what it was. And it was my upbringing and being brought up in a household where there was a lot of scarcity, in terms of a scarcity mentality, is what I'm trying to say. And so therefore I heard a lot of, we don't have the money, we can't afford it. So that continued to recirculate in my mind over and over and over again. It didn't matter if the financial situation was different. It continued to circulate in my mind, which therefore caused me to take action to recreate that, in a sense.
Hmm.
And that's why I just am so adamant, and why I focus on that, and have been since I started podcasting, on that money story. Being aware of it is so critical to really understand why you feel the way you do about money, and why maybe you have that overwhelm or that fear when you go to swipe that card at the grocery store. It's really important to have that awareness.
And so, what does business look like as usual for you?
Yeah. So the normal business day, or business week, it runs from the podcast to securing a guest, to taking care of my community and offering my services, to becoming visible, to setting myself up for speaking engagements, working with brands. So that's really like that's what it looks like. And now it's really no different. It's just pivoting somewhat in the approach.
So, what is different about the approach? What has pivoted?
The messaging, and really being more sensitive, especially with potential clients. I'm trying to really put myself in their shoes. Am I going to approach them in the same way that I was approaching them before? No, things have changed. Am I going to change my pricing? It's a difficult decision. Do I change my pricing, or do I change my offering? Because the problem is still that I'm trying to solve is the same, but their situation, maybe if there's a loss of income, that really escalates the situation to what the problems that they're dealing with. So in terms of clients, it's just my approach. In terms of speaking engagements and working with brands, it's continuing to be visible, but really offering virtual services, virtual webinars. There are virtual summits. There are those possibilities. So it's really pivoting into just thinking about what their needs are with everybody, whether it's a corporate client or whether it's a consumer. It's just really putting myself in their shoes because there's so many different scenarios, right? Some people, their finances really haven't changed, like if they're working from home, but others, it's changed drastically. And on top of that, a lot of people don't have that emergency savings in place. That makes a huge difference on top of whatever health issues. I mean, if they're dealing with the coronavirus or they are more susceptible, there's so many different scenarios, right? That can
Mhm.
happen. So it's just being really sensitive with that.
Do you find that your clients and potential clients are reaching out to you with sort of the same problems and questions as normal, or do you feel that their focus has shifted? Like you mentioned, emergency fund savings. And I feel like, though that's something that you always teach and you always recommend, it seems like more people are suddenly thinking about that and talking about that than what they might normally.
I think in terms of the messages that I get, it's the same. It's just, again, it's just been escalated by whatever situation, whatever changes that they're dealing with. It's just been escalated to maybe more pressing for them, like the emergency savings, or maybe they're in a scenario that they might have to ask for help from the government, food stamps, all that good stuff that they're like, no, they have to put their pride aside, right? Or maybe they have to search for ways to just make that extra money because if they don't have a much of an emergency savings and there's a loss of income, and even if they minimize as much the expenses, I call the bare bone expenses, just the essentials that you need, there might be still some money that you need. You might be
Mhm.
still lacking some money. So how are you going to make up for that difference? Yes, the emergency fund can help, but how long will it go for?
Yeah.
And then you have to think ahead and stay ahead of the game. I shouldn't call it a game. It's not a game, it's real life, but stay ahead of it.
For some of us, it might help if we think about it as a game. It makes it a little bit less,
Talking
less.
about being sensitive, I'm like, oh, that was not very sensitive, just like to say.
You just made me think of something that might be a complete tangent, and I'm not sure if you have any thoughts on this, but thinking about support and help that you might consider applying for or need to apply for that you wouldn't normally necessarily need. Like, for example, this whole thing with the Paycheck Protection Program that the SBA was offering. And I originally was not going to apply for it because I have contractors that I pay. Obviously, I pay myself. I don't have any employees, but my understanding was that it could be for contractors or for self employed people as well. And my business has been affected in that I have a couple of clients who are big contracts that have put their contract on indefinite hold. So I
Mm,
may or may not get that money ever. But I do still have business and I do still have work. And yes, I have to tighten things a little bit, but I'm not about to go out of business or lay people off or something like that. So I was like, maybe I won't really apply for this. But then my friend who works in banking, she was like, I think you should still apply for it because you're fine now and your clients are continuing to pay you now. But you don't know what your client situation is going to be in 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 10 weeks. Things could look very different, and it could be really helpful for you to have that buffer. There's nothing wrong with applying for it. Then on the flip side, by the time I applied for it, it was too late and all the money was gone anyways. And so it's kind of a moot point at this moment. But I feel like this whole situation, stimulus checks, paycheck protection programs, EIDLs, unemployment, food stamps, all these different things that people are thinking of differently or looking at what are the resources that I can get outside of my work or outside of my job or outside of my business. It sort of has a tendency sometimes to bring out the worst in people
yes.
in terms of what they feel they're entitled to. Or my friend who works in banking, like, was telling me about how some people are so frustrated and then they call her and she's trying to help them, but there's only so much she can do. And then they're like taking out those emotional frustrations on her by being terrible people in the moment. So I'm curious if you have any ideas around the heightened, as you said, the heightened emotions around where the money is coming from and what we feel like we can or can't get.
Whew, okay.
It's
So
a big question, I know.
that's a big question. So thinking of your friend that's in banking, and I mean, people, especially the banks that have been working overtime, people are, like I said, the escalation, we're taking it, this pandemic and this quarantine, completely different, right? And on a given day, too, like some days you feel good. Yes, that's all good. And then other days you're hit, right? And depending on your situation I mean, there's so many different scenarios, as I said. So it's hard to navigate because we don't know. We've been in this for probably almost 2 months, and we don't know how long this is going to be. I mean, we know it's going to be hard, but we don't know the repercussions, the exact repercussions. Besides, the economy is going to be horrendous. And I think the unknown is causing this. So
Yeah.
you have this, you've already been shut in, and then you don't know what's going to be in the future. Your finances are kind of up in the air. So there's just a lot of fear. And so I understand. I've been that other person at the other end of the line with Instacart because I paid for their services and all of a sudden I can't get groceries delivered and they didn't answer the chat. Then
Mm,
it took forever for them to answer the customer service
yeah.
request of me. I want my, at least a portion of my money back because I paid for like the whole year. I'm like, why should I continue? Why I should get some of that money back? So in response, again, they're receiving a lot of requests because Instacart, those especially the services, have been hit hard. That person didn't really read my email. So the response to that email was like a very templated email
Yeah.
of what their policies are. And I had to rewrite. I'm like, you didn't read what I said. So I know I'm kind of hopping around your question, but that is just my point that there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of fear that brings out the worst in us sometimes, especially whatever given day something happens, something that triggers. I mean, we're human. I mean,
Yeah.
it's happened to me with Instacart. And yeah, I didn't say very nice words, but just as an example, that it's just the situation we're in. It's hard to navigate this. How do we navigate this?
Yeah. And I think you had some very solid practical advice in an episode that you recently released on your show, which I have it written down, is called How to Be Financially Resilient and Press On. And so this word resilient, I feel like is kind of your main message overall. I mean, obviously, like you said, everyone's situation is a little bit different right now, and people are dealing with different challenges, different levels of budgetary stress or financial stress, and the emotional stuff, the health stuff. So you can't speak to what everyone should do, but this feels like your underlying message about being resilient. Can you talk a little bit more about what that word means in terms of finances?
So, resilient is a term that essentially means you're able to navigate through tough times. And the good news is, and there's really no bad news in this, but the good news is that we are resilient because at some point in our life, we've already navigated some tough time, whatever challenge that may be. And so that's the good news. And I think we're all resilient, but we just don't know how to navigate. And I have to tell myself this, and I'm not just speaking on the podcast because I'm teaching. I have to remind myself of this. I'm a human being as well. And the message of just focusing on what you can control. That's just so critical right now. We can't control the economy. We can't control the spread. Well, we can't control the spread. We can take precautionary measures with the social distancing and wearing a mask, but we just really need to focus on what we can control. And in terms of finances, what we're spending, the strategy that we're taking to move forward in this pandemic, making that plan B and minimizing what expenses, prioritizing how, if this money runs out, what debt, let's say you have multiple debts, what debt should I focus on? And things of that sort. So the resilience is about knowing that you've got this because you've already had a challenge that you've dealt with, focusing on what you can control and really creating a plan. You have to sit down and think through different scenarios. And then this is not to be a Debbie Downer, it's just really becoming realistic. Okay, what is the worst case scenario? What's the scenario right now and what's the best case scenario, and you can create plans around those. And it doesn't have to be anything fancy. It just can be, okay, if the worst case scenario comes to be, this is what we're going to focus on financially in terms of we're going to stop paying this, but we'll continue paying this. If this is the best case scenario, we'll be saving this money towards emergency, whatever that is. But you need to really think about what are the possibilities and how would you manage those worst case, best case scenarios? Because if you're already thinking ahead and creating a plan, even though it may not be perfect, it doesn't have to. You've already, whenever that comes to be, whatever scenario comes to be, you've already thought ahead and navigating it will be so much easier instead of not thinking about it at all and then have some scenario come, stare you right in the face. And then all of a sudden you're dealing with emotions, with fear, with overwhelm. Having that plan, you've already thought about it, you are able to navigate it so much easier.
What are some resources or ways that you work with your current clients or can work with clients to help support making that plan?
I think the first step is looking at your household and what's important. What is important? What are the biggest priorities at this point? So obviously for all of us is going to be food and paying the utilities. And I think a big priority for all of us is the internet because this is the only way we're keeping connected, right? And the cell phone bill. But within your family, there might be some dynamic, some specific thing that is really important. It could be some health issue, maybe some medication that you need to take. So you need to prioritize that. And we're not going out to eat, but maybe carry out is something that you're still is important to you or because you don't want to cook. So you have to really outline for your family what makes the most sense, what are the most important things for your particular family, and to help you navigate this time a little easier, right? So it's not about just cutting everything out and not and literally just living on the essentials, but what's going to make your life easier at this time? Like I already mentioned, internet.
Mhm.
There, don't take our internet. We had an internet shortage the
Uh-huh.
other day. And I was like, thank goodness this is not during the week because it was in the morning. It was on a Sunday morning and
Okay.
there was no internet. Granted, we had data on our phone. So we
Yeah.
were able to maneuver the phones. And I'm thinking, what if this happens during the week and I'm doing podcast interviews, webinars, and everything? But, anyways, I digress there. But really, it's just thinking ahead and just making sure that you know what's important for your family. And then from there is looking at what your expenses are, how can you minimize, what are some things that can just go out the door. If you were a big movie go, if you went to the movies a lot, obviously you can take that out, things of that sort. And from there, once you made a list of your priorities, you looked at your expenses, you got to look at your income. How has that shifted? And then from there, you calculate what I call the bottom line. So your income minus your expenses. And you'll have some sort of number, whether it's a positive number, maybe it's zero, or maybe it's in the negative. And from there, you want to look at, okay, so if it's in the negative, what can I use to support this number? And that could be your emergency funds. Okay, how long for? Or maybe your emergency funds is not enough. That's when you have to start thinking maybe a side hustle, bringing in some extra income, or asking for help, putting your pride aside and asking for help. So it's really figuring that out for the next months because we don't know how long. What is
Right.
the game plan? And so that's essentially your plan B. And in my podcast, I discuss it really more into more detail in terms of different types of debt. What if you have a mortgage versus a credit card and you didn't have enough money for both? Which one do you leave? Well, you got to pay the mortgage, but you can have a conversation with the credit card company. So it takes you step by step. And there's a great resource that even helps you navigate that in terms of what debts, pieces of debt should be left to last if your situation were in that position.
On the flip side, I'm wondering if there are any opportunities in this situation. So, we're talking a lot about being careful, analyzing your spending, what to do if you need to dip into that emergency fund. But as you mentioned, also there are some people who are not in that emergency mode necessarily. I'm just thinking of my own because I use this lovely tracking app for my personal spending that I started using when I was in your program. So I see exactly where all my discretionary income or variable income is going. It occurs to me, wow, I'm really saving a lot right now on the transportation category because I'm not going anywhere. And so I was thinking to myself, well, if I'm saving all that money, how come I don't have more money in my account?
Yeah, so this is exactly why. It doesn't matter if you, and I'm really adamant that if you are in a situation where your income hasn't changed, you still have that same job. You're just teleworking from home, or you're a creative entrepreneur. You're still working. You need to see where your savings are, because if we don't do anything with that savings, you're going to experience what you just said. You don't know where it went. So if you know ahead of time, okay, you're not traveling, you're not taking an Uber, you're not taking whatever, using gas for the car, much gas. I mean, I've been on the same like 3/4 of a tank for like 3 weeks.
Yeah.
It's crazy. But anyway, so if you're not doing that, how much is that saving you? So you need to know that dollar amount. Okay, this is the dollar amount. Where do I filter this money to? And you need to do that like right away, because if not, it's not going to be there. It's just going to be spent. You're not going to see it. It happens time and time again.
Are there any other opportunities that you can think of once we do make it to the other side of this? Do you think that there is, I hate all these euphemisms, like a silver lining or some kind of positive impact that can come out of this for people, once we are able to like breathe a little easier?
Right. Oh, there's definitely some positive. But before I get into that, I wanted to make sure that if you're listening to this and you're needing some guidance, and I can send you the link. AFCPE, which is where I got my fancy letterings from, has partnered up with Wells Fargo and the Yellow Ribbon Network to provide free financial counseling
Oh,
during this time. So I'll provide you that link. So I think that's important for people to know. In terms of on the other side, how are we going to come out of this? I think people are going to be thinking more about their finances. Hopefully, that's the finance person in me. Hopeful for that. I think we're going to be more prone to become better savers for our emergency funds. I think we're also going to not be so scared about the investments going down,
yeah.
right? Being more resilient. I'm just going to use that. Being more resilient in terms of the investments when there's a market downpour like we've been having. And I think as well, I don't know if this is a positive or not, but I think we're going to be more conscious about those germs, right? And maybe to the extreme. I've never considered myself a germaphobe, but since I've been analyzing, especially when I've had to go to the grocery store because Instacart didn't help me out, is because I would go in, this is before the mask and everything. I would go in and my thought process, okay, I'm just going to use my sleeve so I don't touch anything. And then I realized, okay, if I've cleaned off my cart, right? And then I go to open like the refrigerated section, I've already touched germs. And then I'm going to touch the cart again. And I was like, it messes with your mind so bad, because every little move that you make, oh, I just touched it again, or just leaving the grocery store. What did I just touch? Okay, I gotta sanitize my credit card. And then you put it in your pocket and then you touch the groceries. It's,
It's too much.
it's way too much.
So, for you personally, so that you don't go too far on the deep end of cleaning tendencies, but for your own like mental health, your own personal well being, what kinds of things are you doing to take care of yourself and your family right now?
I noticed, especially the first 3 weeks, how much of an impact it had on me, because basically the boys were home. So what would happen? No one, well, besides my husband, since in the military, no one had to get up early. So therefore, in my routine, normally it goes: the boys go to school, I go to the gym, I work out, come home, get ready, and that's how I start my day. I'm focused and I'm ready to go. So this craziness happened, and the boys didn't go to school, right?
Mhm.
And then I would get up and I just wasn't as productive. So I had to create a routine. And it's been touch and go. I'm going to be honest. Like, it's been touch and go because we've had these really cool days. So I told my husband, since he's up, I would get up at 5:15. I'm out the door at 5:30 to go for a walk with my dog, and I'm listening to a podcast or an audiobook. I come back, I do my workout, and then I literally for a couple hours, I'm taking care of me. Like in our normal days, that couple hours maybe would be stretched out throughout the day here,
Yeah.
but meditate and read. So it's like
Mhm.
literally going for a walk, just listening to, I mean, I'm just been listening. I love Alicia Keys and she's got a book. So I've been listening to her book on Audible. And then coming back, I do the workout, I meditate, I read, and that has helped me so much. And then if I'm feeling blah, like I had like yesterday, I pushed myself to go outside. And even though it's been chilly, it's like I've been in the 30s. I'm like,
I
please,
know.
come on, warm up weather. And so I just try to push myself to go outside and just soak up some sun, and that helps. I've literally just, even if I didn't, because it's been awkward going outside and walking, because everybody's walking outside. And so you feel awkward because you have to avoid people. It's just really, it feels
It's
really
like a video game. I feel like it's a virtual reality video game of like avoid the other pedestrians.
Yeah, and I'm in a suburb. I'm not in the city like you. So it's just everybody's out walking their dog. And I'm like, that's why I go at 5 early in the morning because no one's out or very little. And so I'm
Yeah.
not having to have this awkward. So if I can't, if there's too many people and I feel very awkward, I just sit in my lawn and just soak up some sun rays. And I've bought some coloring books, color by number. So I don't have to think.
You don't even have to choose.
And I literally have spent hours in the evening just coloring. And that I think has really helped. My husband will come in, he's like, "You're coloring again." Like that's my thing. Like that has got helped me get through quarantine, just things like that. And of course, staying connected with friends. I mean, Zoom and all that jazz.
Yeah. I'm not a jigsaw puzzle person, but I had a puzzle that I had received as kind of like a stocking stuffer gift for Christmas. And I was like, oh, now is the time. Now is the time to put
Yeah.
together the puzzle. There was one day where literally all I did was work on the puzzle. I was like, I can't use my brain today. I can't think about things. I can't be productive. I cannot. And I just was working on it, working on it. Hours went by. And then when it was done, I was like, oh,
What now?
I don't have any more puzzles. But I get it that something that is still active, but you don't have to use that almost like creative problem solving part of your brain, which is
Right.
probably on overdrive.
Yes. It is.
Is there anything else that you can think of that's advice for the creatives in the audience who are looking at their business, or maybe they're looking at their creative work, whether it be like their primary income or their side hustle? Any piece of advice about how to manage either the mindset portion of their finances right now or the nuts and bolts? I feel like you did give us a lot of nuts and bolts.
I think the other piece is to have patience, right? Because we can't rush things. I think that, and really allowing yourself to, as creatives, what can you do to think outside the box? What other things can you do that you, whether you can offer or something that's been on your to-do list, like my about me page and work with me page, for a very long time that you just haven't gotten to. What can you work on now that maybe is some, yeah, obviously try to think of something that will make you more money, but what are the things that you've been ignoring in your business that can be done now? Right? Or how can you shift and pivot? What are some creative things that you can do that you can shift and pivot? I mean, just ask yourself those questions. I think just by asking questions is you'll find an answer.
Is there anything else that you want to share with the listeners right now that you haven't had a chance to say or that is coming into your mind that you just feel like we need to hear?
Oh, goodness. Besides just being patient, having the grace. And I think another thing that I've been seeing, a lot of guilt, a lot of guilt. The one thing that I have been seeing is I haven't saved up and the guilt around that. I don't have an emergency savings and I haven't built it up. Or why did I get myself into all this debt? So I think those things, you need to let that go. Focus on the now and give yourself the grace that you're going to get through this. But I think that's important to say because I have seen this, but I can only imagine because sometimes we don't talk about it, especially money. If there's a lot of shame and guilt, we're not going to say it out loud, right? So I think it's important for all of us to know if you don't have that emergency fund, or for some reason, a month before in February, you racked up a lot of credit card debt for whatever reason. This is not the time to place guilt or shame upon yourself, right? This is the time to just let that go and just do what you can with what you have and move forward.
Do what you can with what you have and move forward. That is an excellent mantra for the time and maybe forever. So grateful to Jen for her honesty, her vulnerability, her expertise, her time, her energy. Links to all things Jen Hemphill, including her podcast, Her Dinero Matters, will be in the show notes for this episode at thecreativeimposter.com/101. Also, are you a podcaster or aspiring podcaster who wants better interviews for your show? Interviews as good as this last one, if I do say so myself? I've spent some time crafting the way I do interviews, and it's not as obvious as it may seem. I'm offering a free class online May 2nd at noon Central Standard Time inside the Creative Imposter Facebook group. You can join now to catch it for free or watch the replay for up to 24 hours after the broadcast ends. If you missed it, no worries. You can still catch it at thecreativeimposter.com/craft and culture. That is my exclusive resource section for podcasters over on Patreon. For just $5 a month, you'll get access to class replays and exclusive podcast content, or upgrade to VIP to get even more access to my podcasting tips, best practices, and industry insight email that usually only goes out to my current clients. Once again, that URL is thecreativeimposter.com/craft and culture. Thank you to Edwin Ruiz for mixing this episode, to Jovia Armstrong for our theme music. Thank you for listening, and this week I am wishing you health, wealth, and the mindset you need to just keep moving forward.